Greetings again, everyone. This is Professor McKenzie. Today, I'm going to be covering Chapter 2 out of our online textbook, and we're looking at corporate social responsibility and ethics. So in terms of our learning objectives, I want us to be able to define what ethics is, explain, hopefully, and appreciate the importance of good ethical conduct for business persons and organizations, understand different philosophical approaches when it comes to ethics, distinguish between the merits of ethical considerations as well as other choices when it comes to ethical decision making, and then finally look at shareholder versus stakeholder models when it comes to different approaches involving ethical resolution. So when we talk about ethics, obviously this is business law, so the focus is going to be business. But when we think of ethics, it's a branch of philosophy, and we're really kind of trying to get to the core of what does it mean to have values in this context of human nature. And so we're trying to figure out and discern what is the right thing to do, what is the best thing to do in a situation. Maybe not necessarily what's convenient or what's good for us as individuals or as an organization. So it kind of requires a more broad kind of view of what is the best thing in terms of what we're trying to deal with. It's my hope, pardon me, it's my hope that, I think of, each of us as individuals and also as like organizations, so businesses. I think of us as traveling down a highway, and whenever there's an ethical problem, it's like a road hazard, and so if you can see the hazard coming at you, metaphorically, as you're driving down the highway, then you can take appropriate measures beforehand to avoid having an accident, and that's really the spirit of how I try and explain and instruct topics when they involve ethics. Unfortunately, sometimes out of nowhere, an accident just happens. And so you may be looking in your rearview mirror to kind of extend that driving metaphor. And you may realize that an accident just happened, and now what do we do? And so, again, if you have a good foundation of ethical, kind of principles, you're able to kind of figure out, okay, this is what we need to do. Even though the problem has already happened, what can we do to kind of, repair it so that we can maintain the good faith that we have built with our customers, our business partners, whoever that we're dealing with. So when we talk about the law represents what I call like an ethical minimum or ethical floor. So if you're a company and, let's say you broadcast, well, we pay our taxes. Well, okay, you're supposed to, that's not really something to brag about. So if you're following the law, that's what's expected of you, because if you don't follow the law, there's sanctions, possible, criminal sanctions and punishment that's going to be imposed. It's doing something that's above and beyond, that's not expected or required by the law. That's usually in the realm of what we're getting at when we talk about good ethical conduct. Again, I always like to try and personalize, some of these concepts. And so think of you and I as individuals in society. I just recently filed my taxes, the annual, for income tax. And so, like most people, we have income, we have deductions, and then this is our tax obligation. We either get a refund or we have to pay, whatever, we settle with government. And, we don't have to, you and I as individuals, we don't have to be charitable. We don't have to make donations, for example, to different causes, whether they're religious or they're, nonprofit, if they're, social or like disease research. There's so many different charities that you could give your money to. But if you do give money to charities, depending on where you fall in terms of your tax bracket, there are tax incentives, so that the government will encourage you. It's like, hey, if you are going to donate, you'll get a tax break. So, that's what I mean by the law is like an ethical minimum. We don't have to be charitable. We don't have to help our fellow persons or fellow creatures on this planet. But if you do, and it's in the form of like a cash donation, then there are going to be benefits that the government will confer upon you. So that's kind of like what I want us to really kind of understand, that the law, sure, follow the law, that's great, that's what you're supposed to do, that's a non-negotiable. But hopefully you can be inspired as you go through life to maybe think of doing something more than just follow the law. And that's what I want you to kind of. Okay, in terms of law as a standard for business ethics, positive law, the position is that if an act is legal, it is moral. And so sometimes I'll ask students, can you give me an example of something that is legal to do from a business perspective? And then but it's not something that you think is as being moral or an ethical thing to do. Sometimes students come up with the example of pollution. Businesses, whether you're a power plant, if you make cars, if whatever, your business is about, you make a product or provide a service, there's a certain amount of environmental regulation where we allow companies to, emit things into the atmosphere or discharge things into waterways. And within certain parameters, that's legal. Maybe a moral or ethical argument is that, should we be polluting the environment? That maybe is not an ethical or a moral thing to do, even though it's illegal to do. So, this is part of the challenge, when we're trying to kind of grapple with, law and morality and ethics. There's just so much that the law can do in order to kind of further a better society and a more just society. And it really is kind of incumbent upon us to, either encourage better legislation or for us on an individual level to just change our behavior so that we're doing something that is, maybe trying to aspire towards a higher purpose or goal. Natural law, again, it's these higher standards for ethics. The example I think the author discusses is that a law can be legal but maybe unethical. Again, you could think of again, other examples where it's like, okay, sure, it's legal, but it's not really ethical. Or you could try and do the reverse, where maybe something is illegal, but maybe you think it's the moral or the right thing to do. Again, for business persons, sometimes studying ethics can be a challenge because you don't really like this fuzziness that ethics presents. You want to just know, what is the law? What do I have to do? What do I not have to do to stay out of trouble? And I want to try and sell my product or service, and I want to make money. I get that. But hopefully, as you kind of, go through life, you'll have a greater appreciation for, maybe trying to, leave a more lasting imprint on the world in your own way, in terms of how you treat others and in the causes that you want to embrace as a professional. Strategies for management. So, because of the two perspectives that we have, it's really a duality. You can either have a compliance-based ethical system or you can have an integrity-based ethical system. Compliance is, I'm just following the law and that's it. Whatever the law and regulations are, that's all that I care about. And I'm not going to delve any deeper than that. And so it's a fairly simple analysis, in terms of what you're trying to do here. If you're embracing more of an ethics-based approach when it comes to ethical conduct, you're following the law. That's a given, but then you're also doing something above and beyond what the law expects. So in a few minutes, I'll talk about a company called Ben & Jerry's, the ice cream company. And they're a great company to kind of illustrate the example of embracing this idea of an integrity-based ethical system. They do what they're supposed to do in terms of, they pay their taxes, they follow the law, they follow regulations that are imposed upon them as a food producer. But then they also do things that are above and beyond what the law expects. And we'll talk about them in a few minutes. But it's a great example of that. But these are really the two perspectives that companies can take. Are we going to be compliance-based or are we going to be integrity-based in our ethical approaches? So different major ethical perspectives. So think of like utilitarianism. That's where, we're emphasizing results, not necessarily specific rules. And so we're trying to do the most good for the most people from a utilitarian perspective. If we're looking at deontology, if that's your ethical frame of reference as a construct to adhere to, this is where, we're looking at maybe moral intent and you are following specific rules and you're not necessarily focusing on what you think is the right results. You're more focusing in on the equality of persons. Social contract is a broad theory, and it kind of has different applications. But the idea that, in exchange for pure freedom, we're giving that up in order to secure the benefits of living in the community. We're not necessarily relying on just ourselves, but we're also kind of dependent on others. And then virtue ethics embraces this notion of whatever the virtuous quality is that you're trying to kind of hone in on. Honesty, generosity, courage. Again, not necessarily formal rules or specific outcomes or results. You're more concerned with, I should just be an honest person, even though maybe that might be harmful to people at times. Or I should be courageous or generous. Again, it may not produce a positive result, but being this way has its own reward. And so again, and I think this is part of what business persons can struggle with, is that you can use any one of these theories, and it's going to lead you maybe to different results or decision points. But you're still acting ethically, And so, I get the perspective that sometimes business owners have. It's like that this can be kind of too fuzzy, and let me just follow a compliance-based standard or just follow the law when it comes to anything involving an ethical decision. The topic of shareholder versus stakeholder equity. So the image you have there are of stakeholders. And so for any particular business here in the US, there's a lot of different, what I call stakeholders, and that's anyone that has an impact in a decision made by whatever the entity is or organization. So, if it's, let's say, the Microsoft Corporation, obviously they have shareholders, they have employees, they have management, they have customers, they have institutions, business, and academic that they sell their software to. There are regulators that oversee, the tech industry. So all of those individuals, whenever Microsoft makes a decision, potentially could impact any one of those groups or more. Shareholder theory is where you kind of discard everybody but shareholders. It's like the mantra for the company is we want to return as much value as possible to the ownership of this company, meaning shareholders. And we're not as concerned about employees. We're not as concerned about customers. We're not as concerned about regulators or society or suppliers, whatever. We would just want to keep the ownership happy for our corporation. So, again, when you're comparing shareholder versus stakeholder, stakeholder is much more inclusive. It includes shareholders, but so much more, as you can kind of see. And, I think the more modern approach from a lot of companies is that there is more and more, evidence that companies are embracing this idea of stakeholder theory. Sure, owners need to be kept happy. I get that, in any type of business structure, but, you can't mistreat employees. You can't, provide an inferior product or service to customers. You have to respect business relationships that you enter into. So, there is this pull, I think, that's just an evolutionary pattern where more and more companies are going to be more stakeholder focused as opposed to just shareholder focused. The case of Ben & Jerry's as just a great illustration. Since their inception, they have always donated a specific amount, it's 7.5% of pre-tax income, to a charity. And charities, over the years have evolved. It could be dairy farmers if you're talking about in Vermont, but then also they'll donate to inner city issues, depending on wherever they do business. And so in the mid 1990s, Ben & Jerry's had an opportunity to expand into Japan, and the distributor that they were looking at had no history or record of philanthropy. So the idea of making charitable donations to whatever the particular cause is. And so Ben & Jerry's said, well, thank you, but no thank you. They passed on that opportunity in Japan. And it could have been very lucrative for the company. And so for them, that was their line in the sand. They were like, if we're going to partner with you for any distributor anywhere in the U.S. or outside the U.S., you have to have a track record of, being charitable. Now, the fuzziness that I mentioned earlier with ethics, that's certainly a perfectly very legitimate position for Ben & Jerry's to embrace. We only want to deal with people that are charitable. That's fine. The fuzziness of ethics, though, there is an approach that you could take. You could say, look, maybe this company has never made charitable donations, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do business with them. Partner with them, sell your product in Japan, make a lot of money. You can donate 7.5% of those profits to charities. So you're doing good with those sales. And also, maybe the leadership in that distributor from Japan, maybe invite them to the United States and say, look at what we're doing here with these donations. We're helping inner city, maybe schools, or we're helping dairy farmers in rural Vermont, or we're helping, fill in the blank, whatever the particular cause is. Maybe it's a disaster relief. And maybe you change hearts and minds of those Japanese executives so that they'll go back home and they'll say, we want to do what Ben and Jerry's is doing because what we saw moved us. When you just summarily kind of shut them down and don't do business with them, they may never learn or appreciate the benefits of being charitable. So that's the challenge in ethics. You can be very, kind of like, this is a very rigid perspective we have, like Ben and Jerry's historically has been. Or maybe you could open yourself up and say, look, it isn't necessarily a bad thing that we're doing business with the company that's not charitable, because we know maybe over the years we're gonna encourage or prod them, and they're gonna see the benefit of just being generous and being kind to those that are in need in some way. The importance of trust, good ethical conduct is everything when it comes to any kind of relationship. So whether it's a social relationship that you or I may have, one-on-one with others, or if it's a collective relationship that an organization or a business has with customers or contributors, whoever the particular group is, that is everything. And one thing that I like to talk about in my face-to-face classes, when we buy products, so if I go to McDonald's and I get lunch, if I go to the grocery store and I buy, shampoo or, whatever I purchase, think of all the different things that you buy day in and day out. I'm putting a lot of faith in who created those products, in that, it's not tainted with some kind of contaminant. It's not going to hurt me. It doesn't have chemicals that could kill me. I'm putting a lot of faith that they're doing what they're supposed to do to be very above board and ethical as they sell me products and services. Two examples that were examples of very bad ethical leadership is Enron from about 20 years ago. Because of accounting fraud and embezzlement, their share price, it was an energy investment firm, their share price dropped from $87 a share to 67 cents a share in a period of about 1 year, from 2001 to 2002. Columbia Healthcare, their share price dropped 58%, and that was largely due to Medicare fraud. Within their network of physicians, those physicians were billing for services that were either not necessary or were not performed, and they were billing the federal government for compensation of those services. The last one there, which is to me is the most, I should say the most egregious, but it's bad, is Beech-Nut baby food. In the late 70s and early 80s, Beech-Nut was contemplating expanding into offering, toddlers fruit juice, apple juice in particular. And they had already had baby food and baby formula, so that was their kind of niche in the marketplace, and they wanted to expand on horizontal integration of a new product, standard business expansion strategy, and so they worked up the estimates, the product design, the product cost, excuse me, and a committee was formed, and they worked up, this is how much we expect to make per bottle of apple juice made, after we paid for the apples from apple growers, after we paid for, all the other, ingredients that go into apple juice and get it on the shelf. The team also worked up numbers for creating, what they would label as 100% pure apple juice, but it contained no apples. And what it had was, it had water, it had flavoring, apple flavoring and colorings. And so it tasted like apple juice, but it had no apples in it at all. And the company, which again, these are very well-educated people, it's not a lapse of a lack of knowledge in the decision they made. They were just blinded by pure greed, and they went with the completely fake, fabrication of this apple juice, and it was labeled as 100% pure apple juice. And again, I always ask this to students in class. I mean, I could not imagine a group of Americans I would not want to get mad at me than moms. Because moms are generally very protective of their children, and obviously they were found out, and it became a big scandal. And I think there was a few people that went to prison, and there was millions of dollars of fines imposed on Beech-Nut, and that was a huge damage to their reputation. And for what? The idea that maybe we'll make 5%, 10% more, whatever it is, that they were able to make more than if they would have just made traditional 100% pure apple juice from apples. I think when I think of ethics, I think of Beech-Nut, because you always have to be diligent. You always have to kind of avoid that temptation. If you're ever asking yourself, and this is more of a philosophical question, but if you're asking yourself this personally or professionally, who's going to find out? You should stop right there. Someone always finds out. And so it's very, very important that you kind of keep that mindset of, it's just easier to do the ethical thing. It's easier to do the right thing. Definitely follow the law. That's a minimum. That's what you have to do, or you get in trouble. But maybe there's something that we can do that's above and beyond what the law expects in order to make this whole existence a better place. That really is the focus, the heart, the spirit of what ethics is. I think this is the last slide that I have. Steps to an ethical decision. If you're fortunate enough to see an ethical problem maybe coming at you, a potential problem. So if you're Beech-Nut, because obviously they planned this for a long time before they implemented it. Gather relevant information, identify stakeholders. Who are the persons that can gain, who are the persons that can lose from what we're trying to do. Identify several likely or reasonable decisions that could be made. So are we going to make 100% pure apple juice, or are we going to make this fake apple juice? If you want to make 100% fake apple juice, you can. You can call it an apple cocktail, whatever you want to call it. Just don't mislabel it. If you go down a breakfast cereal aisle, there's no end to sugar-based, consumption products for kids. So there's a market for that. If you want to have sugary apple drink, for kids. Some parents, that's fine if that's what kids want. But if you're trying to, label things as 100% pure, organic, all natural, all that stuff, you better make sure that's what's in it, because that's something that that is your brand, that is your element of trust that you're trying to build with who your consumers are. Consider which stakeholders stand to gain or lose with the decision that you make. Determine which decision is going to basically satisfy the greatest number of your core values as an organization. And then at some point you got to make a decision, you have to act, and then hopefully you monitor. Those are some of the overall good steps to take when you're contemplating an ethical action, that's ahead of you. If it's behind you, obviously it's already happened, whatever the train wreck, so to speak, has occurred. And so again, you need to be very forthright in owning that, and not pretend that that you can just ignore it. The more you ignore things that are of an ethical nature, the more that they're going to come back, I think, to be very negative on the organization and for you if you're the one that's actually responsible. So. Actually, this was the last slide. I apologize. So in response to all these recurring scandals that have occurred, most Fortune 500 companies, they have developed written codes of ethics. So it's part of the onboarding process and the regular kind of trainings that employees have to keep them up to speed, in terms of, we want you to make the best, the right, and the ethical decision if you're facing some sort of ethical dilemma. Most companies provide ethical training and workshops for employees, and most companies have ethics officers. So that's usually kind of like an offshoot or a branch of HR. But That's usually a person that is dedicated so that you can go into his or her office. And if you think that there is an issue in the workplace, whatever it is, you can share that information with that person in confidentiality. And hopefully they're able to kind of mediate or intercede with management so that they can take corrective measures and not make this become an ethical blunder. Anyway, I hope this has been an interesting chapter for you all to read and study. As you have questions, please message or call me at your convenience. Otherwise, have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will be chatting with you all in the next chapter coming up. Thank you.